mandate for the Sephardic Association of Ottawa since day one. I think over the last 6 years, we have told stories from various sources, and at times a little bit controversial, but it was at the core what we wanted to narrate and tell these stories. That said, with this year, COVID-19 was not going to stop us. And we decided to look more at the life and experiences of those Jews in Canada. And to hear those Sephardic voices. I wanted to thank Dr. Henry Green, Professor of Judaic and Religious Studies at the University of Miami and the founding director of both the Jewish Museum of Florida and Sephardic Voices, for agreeing to moderate the panel discussions this evening. I'm not sure if Mr. Lipchitz is the first Secretary of the Public Diplomacy Attaché of the Embassy of Israel has joined yet, but welcome. And of course, Michelle Devorah Kahn. I don't know if you all had a chance to look at the beautiful documentary that she's made. She's an award-winning filmmaker, writer, actress, professor. Mrs. Gracie Esses Kahn as well will be joining us, who was born in Beirut, Lebanon. And of course, our past president, Clement Swohr, who will be talking about how his parents and his siblings left Beirut, Lebanon. I want to also thank Professor Isaac Nahon and Clement Swohr for dedication of the essay to the Sephardic Association and their devotion and organizing this evening tonight. So I would let Ms. Dr. Green open the conversation. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, Isabelle. Yes, Dr. Green, please, go ahead. Yeah, unmute your mic. Mute. Perfect, now we can hear you. No, again, unmute, just.
Okay, now, can you hear me now?
Yes, now it's perfect.
Okay. So first, I just want to thank the Sephardi Association of Ottawa for the opportunity for Sephardi Voices to share with you this program and the experiences of the Sephardi Jews who were displaced from the Arab and Islamic world. And I want to thank our panelists. So I thought the best way of maybe beginning is to provide some kind of context. In 1948, there were 1 million Jews between the Atlantic Ocean and the Tigris-Euphrates rivers, and today there are less than 20,000. And so what I would like to do is just begin with a brief overview that gives you some context. And Isaac is going to show a short video of Sephardi Voices, which presents the context.
My name is Jacques
Maria Megnaji.
I was born Haim Wahnish.
Cynthia.
Je m'appelle Claude. Shalom.
My name is Rina Salimi.
I was born in Fez, Morocco.
I was born in Beirut.
Casablanca.
Okay.
Baghdad. On the river Tigris.
Tripoli, Libya.
I was born in Cairo.
And my mother was born in Lebanon. I had a beautiful life in Libya.
The year I was born was still under the rule of Turkey.
I'm a Jew from Morocco for 600 years.
All over the world and throughout history, minorities are always have less rights than the majorities of the country.
It was a nice life, but it was a dream. It was not a real life. We were strangers in our own country.
I feel my past is a total void because when the Jews left Egypt, when they were expelled, they were scattered around the world.
Yes, I am a refugee. Yes, I'm a refugee. They kicked me out with all my family, with nothing, nothing.
On est tous des réfugiés des pays arabes, on est 1 million et il faut se battre pour ça. Il faut continuer à qu'on reconnaisse notre cause, qu'on a été expulsé d'un pays qu'on ne voulait pas quitter. On ne voulait pas quitter, on nous a expulsés.
We were attached to something that we, even without knowing it, we had lost.
On se sent jamais chez soi quand on est dépossédé de sa terre. J'aimerais bien pouvoir retourner, mais on sait qu'on ne pourra jamais retourner.
There is a lot in you that belongs to the past, and you have to go back there if you want to be what you are. You better look at that and see what you can get at.
I don't want my ancestors' achievements to end in my lifetime. I don't want me to be the last link in the chain.
But how can I deny that I'm an Iraqi? I didn't go there as an immigrant. I've been there for 3,000 years.
You're on, Dr. Green.
So thank you. So this provides some context of the million Jews that were displaced. And two of those people that were speaking, Irene Benavida, she came from Egypt. She lived in Montreal. David Cohn came from Morocco. He lives in Montreal. And those are two stories. But tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to hear from the Syrian and Lebanese Jewish experience in Canada. And I want to just say one or two things about Sephardi Voices. The mission of Sephardi Voices is to collect the stories of the Jews who were displaced from the Arab world, from the Islamic world. And so I want to invite you, anyone you know who is in that situation, a first generation, to tell us your stories, to give us your names, and they will be deposited at the National Library of Canada and the National Library of Israel. And the reason this is so important is because if we're going to create pride, if we're going to take ownership, then we need these stories and the photos and the documents to pass on to our children and our grandchildren. And we also have to tell the story because it's a human rights story. And so tonight we are so fortunate because we've been able to watch the movie Wanted, the Joseph Esses Story, produced by the child, Michelle Devorah Kahn, who was displaced. Her parents, were displaced. Her grandparents. And so one understands she's taken ownership. She understands what this means in terms of pride and how it is so important to share the legacy and the story of the Sephardi and Jewish civilization that goes back to Jeremiah, 2,500 years in Iraq. It is a story that is so important. And so I turned it over to Michelle, and please, we look forward to a wonderful evening with your story.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I need to give a quick shout out to Dr. Chaim Kaduri of Tannenbaum Chat, because without him, this film would have never, ever happened. I actually started it back in high school. It was a grade 12 film class project. I never even actually committed to finishing it, so I never thought that anything like this would ever happen, that, you know, years later, And I graduated in 2007. So years later, we're still talking about it. I remember, you know, the day that we filmed it. So for those of you who saw the film, that took a lot of effort to even get off the ground. My grandfather, prior to this film, was a very closed off person. And I know that my mother will be able to add to that. He never spoke about anything about Syria. I knew growing up that he escaped in the middle of the night. And it was told to me almost like a ninja story. He was all in black and he just left. He went to Lebanon and then life got better and then came to Canada. So I was shocked. I know my mother was shocked of some of the stuff I got on film because she didn't even know about it. Leading up to the premiere itself, which we had at the Kahila Center in Toronto, he was really nervous. Again, not telling anybody now but me his story. He wasn't ready for everyone to hear it, but that night I saw such a shift in him. And then afterwards, everything that came, all the other interviews, newspaper articles, and just his general demeanor towards life, towards his own life, everything shifted. So I'm going to ask Isaac if you would show a clip of another interview they did. This one was with B'nai B'rith Canada and the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. Sorry, Isaac, I think you're muted.
He's muted. He doesn't know. He doesn't know he's muted.
Isaac, I think you're muted. Zoom problems. Zoom problems.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back.
Yeah. Okay, it's.
You have to go from the beginning.
The life was very good before 48. And 48, they start to bother the Jew, and they put us on prison. You know, they take us to the prison, every young people.
When it happened on 48 was on Shabbat. But the night before, we were one building full of Jewish people. And only one, they were Christian. They left the building. We didn't know. But my father, when he heard the news coming, the Arab, he gave money to the Shishakli people. And they was the first building to burn it. The first one.
We don't know because Israel has independence, and they start to shout in Arabic some word against the independence of Israel. They go to the shul, they take in all the Toledot, all the book, they throw it in the floor. They start to take in all the Torah and throw it in the floor. And from this, like this, they go, you know.
If I want to go to shul to take my brother, my two brothers to shul, I know the Arab coming. I said to my two brothers, put your head down and let's run. We run. I put them there, I go back.
When I came back at night, in the middle of the street, three Arab come near me and said, "You want a country?" They beat me here, they cut my hair. the blood come. I went home. My mother started to scream, and they say, "What happened?" I say, "This has happened."
We see how the burning, how the voice, people screaming, you name it. I told you, my mother never let us to speak with anyone, not to go out with anyone, especially the girls. We had money, we were very rich people. Everything enforced. During Kamil Shamoun, there were a war, and we were very afraid, the Jewish people. And I go to a family to hide ourselves, and my mother said, "Come on, run away." One Shabbat, when Kamil Shamoun was a big problem, my mother said, "Go to this Catholic school, pick up your brother over there." I went and picked up my brother for Shabbat. We came back. Other sister crying, she wants to stay home because we're hearing all the shooting, all the bombing in Beirut and problem.
At the jail, it is small. Like, she's sweet, she's big. You have to stand. I'm sorry to say, if you want to go out, you can't. You have to do it near you. Inside the small room, it's not. And every 10 minutes, the policeman, the gendarme, they call it, he looked from the window and he crashed on me. Not even, just to all the Jews.
He used to do this. My father didn't get paid, but smuggling all the Jewish people one by one, and this guy gets paid from these people. He put in the car 10, 20, we don't know. He take them to Beirut, or he go to Istanbul, to Turkish, the border. That's I will know later. And after that, my father, not even 2 years after 1950, he passed away. Without the land of Israel, we cannot survive the Jewish people. We are proud to be Jew. No matter where I go, they ask me, "You speak Arabic?" I said, "Yes." "From where?" I said, "From Syria." "Are you from Syria?" "Yes, I am a Jew too." That's why I answer, because I'm not afraid.
Thank you. So that was actually their final interview, if I'm correct, not long after that, and just before it was to be released. My grandmother sadly passed away, and December 4th, I believe, is going to be 1 year that my grandfather passed away as well, as at the age of 101.
Oh.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest treats for me for this whole project, I think, is that even now, I still, after all these years, I still find messages in my Facebook inbox from strangers all over the world who come across the film and, you know, just telling me how great it is or how they were inspired to look into their own backgrounds. And many Jewish people who didn't really know that Jews came from Syria. So it's been really great to see the global effect it's having. Of course, when I made it, I always understood what it would mean for my family, but now, sadly, that both my grandparents are gone, I see what it means for my family. So I encourage anybody listening to definitely get in touch with Sephardi Voices and just look into your own backgrounds because you never know what you'll find. So thank you.
Dr. Green? Yes, sorry.
Unmute.
¿Por qué? Unmute yourself, please. No, we cannot hear you.
I thought I did. Okay,
now
I was saying that I was wondering if Gracie, that Michelle's mother, could say a few words about her experience.
Hi, I'm Gracie Kahn. Thank you so much for including me in this, and this is an honor. I came from Beirut very young. I was only 5. That was in 1966. So I have some memories, but not too many. My parents, as you know from Michelle, came from Syria, and that was very hard for them. There were times they still kind of wish they were back there. They miss a lot of their life back there, but then when it was all taken away, I think it just destroyed their memories a little bit. So my dad never spoke of it. As Michelle said, he never, ever really wanted to talk about his experiences in Syria because he had such a hard time. He was tortured a lot. He was in the jails a lot. I mean, my mother was a lot younger. There was a huge age difference between them. 22 years apart. So when they both left Syria, they both went to Beirut, which is where I was born. That's where they met. And things were great at one time. It was amazing. Life was amazing. People were happy living together. There was no difference between being Jewish and not being Jewish. Everybody was happy. Unfortunately, things started to go bad, and in 1960, I guess it would be 1965, is when my dad started thinking about leaving. And it was very hard for him. He really didn't want to leave. My uncle was already here in Toronto, and he sent him a letter saying, you know, come to Toronto, life will be much easier. So my parents basically left everything behind. They came here with very little. They couldn't really, I guess they couldn't sell their things. I guess the Arabs just took it. Anyway, they left. We came here, and my dad started working for my uncle in the textile business, which is exactly the same business he was doing in Beirut. He had a shop there. He also did the same thing in Syria, by the way. He came here, he worked for my uncle. It was very hard. He did many hours of work. My mom had to raise us pretty much on her own because he was always at work. She, at one point, when we first got here, had to take English lessons. And she also went to school, took sewing, so she became a seamstress. And she also worked in a bakery. So she had a few different jobs going. My brother was also very young. He's 3 years younger than me. So he was 2 when we came. We moved into a building on Bathurst, on Eglinton rather, near Bathurst. And there were other Sephardic Jews that were from Morocco that had moved into that building. So it was a lot easier for my mom because she could speak French with them. And they would take care of us, and we kind of took care of each other. But it was hard. It was very hard for them, especially not knowing the language. The weather was terrible for them.
Now it says mute.
Pardon?
Okay.
Can you still hear me?
Yes,
Oui,
yes.
oui.
Okay.
Il y a une dame et un homme.
Yeah, no, it was a hard life. My parents took good care of us. They enrolled us in Hebrew school, which was great. They had the help. I know everybody knows Mrs. Judy Feld-Carr. She helped my parents immensely. She helped put us in Hebrew school. I know that they helped. They used to talk to her quite a bit, and I know when she was trying to smuggle, she succeeded in smuggling a lot of Jews out of Syria. But my mother, I know, was good friends with her, and they talked a lot. But my parents had a hard life. Being a refugee was very, very hard. I just to this day can't believe how much they did with what little they had. We started out with very little. They did work their way up. When we first got here, we were living in my uncle's house for a little while. And then they got a 1-bedroom apartment, which the four of us were in, and then they worked themselves up and things got better. But it was a hard life. I mean, Michelle knows, because like I said, he opened up to Michelle more than anybody else. And it was fantastic, because at the time when she was questioning what kind of a movie she should make, we talked about it, and I said, you know, my dad's story, we don't even know a full story. All I knew about him is that he, like she said, he escaped during the night. He never wanted to discuss any of it or go through it. There were nights, the only thing I do remember is my mother getting really upset because he had a lot of nightmares, and in his sleep he would every so often kind of accidentally hit her and scream, be screaming at her in Arabic, and he'd have nightmares, I guess, about the jails and confinement. Michelle, did he ever talk to you about that?
Yeah. So that's actually, just real quick, that's actually really interesting, because he did, but I think, as you mentioned later, like as he got older, he would say more, but when I was filming him, he did hold a lot back. Then he told you some, then he told me some more, because he was always really scared. But you could see it was a touchy subject. He wouldn't go too into it.
No, he never did. You know more than I do, probably. Right? Because for some reason, after when you started filming is when he started opening up. But yeah, no, it was hard. But we're so lucky to be here. So lucky. And the funny thing is, I had my grandchildren staying with me this weekend. And we're so lucky. I've got two grandchildren that are amazing, that are 5 and 2. And a new one that was born this week. And the two of them were staying with me, and the older one asked me today, "Where are you from?" So I said, "I'm from Beirut, Lebanon." And she thought for a minute and said, "You know, you think you can take me there one day?" And I thought to myself, you know, I looked at her and I thought, I hope that one day we can go back. I would love to go back. I know that there probably isn't much left of what I would remember. The only memories I have of Beirut, really, because I was very young, was my dad picking me up, taking me to school, and buying me a manouche on the way, which is, I guess, is like a pizza with za'atar on it. He would buy me one every day on our way to school. But she really questioned it, and I don't know, I hope, maybe God willing, things will get better with Israel and they will let us back. I don't know. Michelle will go with me. Are there any questions?
Well, let's hear the story from Clemmy first. But I just want to add one comment, and that is that it is very often that it's the grandchild that is the one that prompts to get the story. You know, I once asked Danny Alon, who was the Israeli ambassador to America and then the deputy foreign minister, and I said to him, "So did you pass on your Algerian identity to your children?" And he said, "No, I didn't know anything. I didn't ask my parents. I was an Israeli." And it was his grandchildren that had to turn to the grandparents in order to get the story. And Michelle's story of being able to draw out the grandparents is a very similar story that you hear among the Sephardi in the various countries, because it's the identity, the ancestry, the legacy that they want to know, they want to be part of. So this is what I'm saying about Michelle's role, how important it is, because she's been able to draw it out and share with us. So let's turn to Clemmy, who also came from Lebanon, and let's hear his story. Please,
Great.
Clemmy.
Thank you very much, Henry. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Good. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here to be part of this discussion, part of this panel. And in the next few minutes, I want to paint a quick sketch of the Lebanese Jewish community, my family's experience as part of that community. But also, I want to talk about briefly the experience of immigrating to Canada. And I think actually, you know, what Gracie talked about just now, I think we had very similar experiences, although we didn't come from Syria. But the immigrant experience was very similar. And I think Gracie, our families probably left Lebanon probably around the same time. So you'll hear more about this in a second. So I was born in 1962 in Beirut. And if you do the math now, you'll know my age. So I want to start by contrasting the experience of the Lebanese Jewish community versus that of other Jewish communities in the Middle East, especially in this case Syria, because this is what we're talking about, and the experience of the SS family. So the Lebanese community, I would say, you know, lived in relative peace with their Muslim and Christian neighbors. You know, I would say, in fact, that most Lebanese Jews today, those who were from there, who were born there, think back to their lives in Lebanon with great nostalgia. You know, and I think it's a case in point that the Jewish community in Lebanon, you know, was the only one to witness an increase actually in its Jewish population after the state of Israel was established. And I think the story of the Esses family shows that. You know, it was very common at the time that families from Syria and from Iraq moved to Beirut in this period. And then in a way the community because of that, saw like a rise and expansion and a flourishing. So I was very young when we left Lebanon. I was barely 5, but I still have some memories of the almost idyllic life that we lived there. You know, the Jewish quarter of Beirut was full of Jewish life, and I can remember our home we lived in, which was very close to our grandparents' house, and not far was where 2 of my uncles lived in an apartment building, and just outside, and for lack of a better word in English, my sisters around here will know what I'm talking about, was a square where we used to play with our cousins. And that was, you know, it was the idyllic life that we lived. Even though I was young, I can still remember a lot of that. The Jewish community in Lebanon was not very large, but, you know, it was still very, very active. We had many Beit Midrashim, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but they're small synagogues, you know, throughout the community. There was a whole bunch of them, actually. You know, I've seen estimates like 15, 16 of them, you know, and that's where most of the men would go to pray. But my father, you know, he'd go to one. We had one just next door to our house, you know, and interestingly, most of these synagogues actually were associated with a particular family. And there was even actually a Sroor family synagogue. But it was small, very small. But the main synagogue was the magnificent Magen Avraham synagogue, which my father would attend every Shabbat morning, you know, after which my mother would have a traditional Shabbat Hamin lunch ready for us. I encourage you, if you have time after this, to go online and read about the Magen Avraham synagogue later. It was actually recently rebuilt, but unfortunately suffered some further damage during the recent Beirut explosion. You know, we also remembered our summers very fondly in Lebanon. Most families would escape to the summer heat and head up to the mountains. And our family would spend most of the summer in a town called Aleh. Aleh was actually, almost the whole community would move up to Aleh over the summer. You know, one of the interesting things I want to talk about the Lebanese Jewish community is again, in contrast to other communities, is that it was a relatively recent community. It was really only in the mid 18th century that Jews really started to settle there. And as a result, most Jewish families in Lebanon actually trace their lineage to other parts of the Arab or the Mediterranean world. I should say there were indeed incidences of intolerance. It was not all, you know, peaceable, wonderful existence, but, you know, we existed with our Christians and Muslim neighbors in relative peace. And, you know, we like I said earlier, people look back at that time period with great nostalgia. And my own theory about why all that is maybe somewhere here there's an academic who can delve more into this, but that Lebanon is very unique in the Middle East. It's a country of great religious and cultural diversity. And I think that diversity necessitated coexistence. You know, I would add, in fact, also the Lebanese constitution actually famously recognizes 18 faith groups, including Judaism, and provided protection for all those faith groups. But unfortunately, when the Lebanese civil war started in the mid-70s, that coexistence seemed to come to an end, and most Jews left the country at that time, and it was very difficult to continue to live in Lebanon at that point in time, unfortunately. So my family left Lebanon in 1967. We immigrated to Canada in April of that year, and that was well before the Civil War started. My parents were looking for a new start, and through the Jewish Immigration Aid Service, or the JIAS, and some of you may have heard of the JIAS, we were provided the assistance to immigrate and to start a new life in Canada. But leaving was not easy for my parents, and my sisters and I often think about how difficult it must have been for them. First, financially, my parents had lost a significant amount of funds when the intra-bank in Lebanon collapsed, and you can Google that. It's a famous story of a major Middle Eastern financial institution going bankrupt. Also, Canada was not just geographically far, but it was literally a completely new world, culturally and everything sense that you can think of. And we may have had one or two acquaintances here, but we had absolutely no family. And coming to Montreal, from a linguistic perspective, at least, because my parents spoke French, that helped a little bit. I was just a little boy when we left Lebanon, but I can remember the emotions I felt leaving the country. And as we were leaving, I burst into tears. Probably not really understanding what was upsetting me. But my grandparents, who happened to be there to see us off, my grandfather in particular, got quite upset. And he encouraged my mother to take me, get on the plane, because I think he found the emotions too overwhelming. And sadly, my grandfather passed away 2 years after that, and I never saw him again. I want to quickly just paint a couple of vignettes about our life in Canada, just to show the difficulties in starting a life here. And first, despite the assistance from the JIAS, we arrived in Montreal just when Expo 67 was opening up. We couldn't find appropriate housing and lived for a year in a one-bedroom apartment in what I would call a very rundown street in Montreal. Some might call it a slum. Second, my father had a hard time finding work, and that was very difficult for him. And my sister just told me that on one occasion he contemplated going back to Lebanon. And I think, Michelle, your grandparents or your grandmother, I think at some point felt the same way as well. Fortunately, my father eventually made a career out of working, selling draperies in Montreal. He did that for many years. And Gracie, like your dad, my dad also worked very hard. They worked 6 days a week. And fortunately, in those days, stores weren't open on Sundays. And at least he had that 1 day off a week. But at the same time, we saw some wonderful things in living in Canada. We arrived in Canada on April 19th, and guess what? Passover was 5 days later. So what to do? Well, the JIAS, through the JIAS, our whole family was invited to a communal Seder of what we called the Y at the time. Sure, it was Ashkenazi food, and we probably ate gefilte fish for the first time, but having that opportunity to have a Seder meant a lot to my parents. Also, I think was a positive thing. We were exposed to the great diversity in Judaism. While we knew some Ashkenazi Jews in Beirut, we had not experienced living in a predominantly Ashkenazi culture before. And we had never seen things like Hasidic communities before. And that was our first exposure to such diversity. We also, I think, saw how we can live as a Jew really without fear whatsoever. My sister was just telling me how it felt seeing the word kasher or kosher in big letters outside a shop. I mean, even though we lived in relative peace in Lebanon, we had a good life, you still had to hide certain things. And at that point also, when we came, Sephardi migration to Montreal was accelerating, and that made our integration easier. But I said earlier, we were one of the first Lebanese families in Canada. Maybe we knew 1 or 2 people, that was it. Later on, other families did move in, and we started to get to know more, or we made more connections. One of the things that sadly what became more real to us when we came to Canada was the reality of the Holocaust. Living in the Middle East, we all knew about that, but it became more real for my parents. When my parents, for the first time, saw people with a number tattooed on their arms, and that made that Jewish experience to all Jewish people very real. So I will stop there, and I hope I gave you a quick idea of the Lebanese Jewish experience, while we were still in Lebanon, and after that when we moved to Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Clemmie. So before, what I'd like people to do is to send their questions through chat to Isaac, who then will be able to voice them, and our panelists, Gracie, Michelle, and Clemmy, then can answer. So let me begin with just a question for everyone who are our panelists. How do you preserve your Sephardi heritage today in Canada? Clemmy, why don't you begin?
Should I go first?
Oh, Michelle, you go first.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Who do you want to go first?
Michelle, you begin.
Go ahead, Michelle. Make my guess.
I see the thing for me. Obviously, it's a very different experience from Clemmy and my mother. But the interesting thing is, it's not so much my Sephardic heritage and culture in Canada. I look at it as my Sephardic heritage and culture within the Jewish community. I grew up in a predominantly Ashkenazic community. I was one of the few Sephardics at my school when I went to United Synagogue Day School. There were some more at Tannenbaum Chat. But growing up, one of my strongest memories in class was when we would talk about the holidays and we would talk about Hanukkah. We light the menorah differently. We light it in a different direction. We use a candle on its own, and then we have to wave it out. And I remember very distinctly we had a quiz in class, and I got the direction wrong that you light the menorah because I always got confused. Even to this day, I'm going to end up asking my mother in a few weeks what way to light because I do not know. I don't know. So I wrote it out, and the teacher, marked it wrong. And I kind of argued with her, and she flat out said, well, your mother doesn't know. That's not how Jews do it. So then I go home, and I'm like, well, this must have been grade 4. I'm like, my teacher, told me that you don't know, and my mom's like, well, your teacher's an idiot. So I grew up knowing that the people around me didn't know about their own history, about the different types of Jews around them. And that's something that stayed with me because even later, I'm married now, but when I was dating and I would be out on a date and they would ask where my parents are from, and I would say my mom's from Beirut, they would question and they would grill me. I have to prove I'm Jewish because Jews don't come from Beirut. How could they? Right? So even to this day, I got to explain it. People have no idea. So it's not so much preserving it. I preserve it in my home with my husband. He's a very proud Iranian. His parents are from Iran. Hi, by the way. They're there. And it's more about educating those around me. It's very difficult because sometimes they just don't believe me. I just got to shrug your shoulders. But that's why it's really great that Sephardi Voices existed, and I did put that film together, and I think people are learning. So I think Clemmy and my mother have more to say.
Go ahead, Gracie.
Hi. Yeah, no, she's right. It's different. Our customs are very, very different, and mine is probably a little mixture of Syrian and Lebanese. So when my husband and I first met, the first thing my parents said to me was, he's not Jewish because he's not Sephardic. And he goes and tells his father, and his father says, well, she's not Jewish. There's no such thing. She can't be from there. Like, there's no such thing as Sephardic. So it's very hard. Now things are a little better, I see. But it's funny that our customs are very different. But, we all believe in the same thing. Right? We all pray to the same God. We all believe in the same thing. It's just we have to be tolerant of each other. And I know that sometimes that's not so easy because I've seen it where I've argued with people over, as she said, which way we light the candles. Or, for instance, during Pesach, we always do, we put the matzah in the cover and we have to wave it over our heads and say something. And whenever Michelle or my other two would bring a friend over and they'd see this and they wouldn't know what to do. And we kind of explain to them, this is a custom, this is, and our foods are different. They're so different.
They're good though.
As my husband will tell you, he loves Sephardic food now. We've converted him. But our customs are very different. Even when going to school, the kids were in school and speaking French was a problem. Because we speak, in Beirut, we were taught the Parisian French, like we spoke. Whereas here, it's the Quebec French, which is really different. So when they would bring home homework and they'd need help, and I would tell them, give them a word or try to help them out, and they'd go to school and they get it wrong. And then I'd have to argue with the teacher. Right, Michelle?
Yeah, but real quick, there was another one. I won't name her. My sister had an argument with her. She was my Tanakh teacher in grade 6, and I think she also taught my sister one of the courses at USCS, and she argued with her that my mom can't possibly be from Beirut because she's too blonde. So she's just calling my sister a liar. I don't know. That's the stuff we put up with.
So I think just to add to that, I think though, growing up in Montreal, I think maybe the experience is a little bit different. Maybe at first, definitely that was the case when we first moved to Montreal. At that point in 1967, there were still very few Sephardic Jews, but by around, as I mentioned in my talk, right around that time, that's when there was a very large Sephardic immigration just starting to Montreal at that point in time. And now Montreal is probably about 50-50 Montreal Sephardi Ashkenazi. So there's really a large amount of exposure to Sephardic customs and Sephardic food and that sort of thing in Montreal. But nevertheless, I mean, yeah, the customs are so different and so unique. And I got to say, I completely agree. Our food is much better. But the other interesting thing as well, though, is that the Sephardic world, in my opinion, is so diverse, probably more diverse than the Ashkenazi world, that when you have a Moroccan Jew and a Lebanese or an Iraqi Jew, the customs are so diverse. The foods are definitely different. There are some that are similar, not that many. That when you meet and interact with other Sephardi people, you have a lot in common, but there's also you still see that there's not exact. There's still a lot of differences, But I guess the one thing I think I should say though, sometimes those differences we need to celebrate it though, because that's something that enriches the Jewish people.
Okay, we have a few questions and comments from the audience. I have the first question coming from. Let me see here. I'm a little bit lost. From Odette Maslia. The question is: do you find that Canadian Jews, even though have interacted with Sephardim in Montreal and other places, still, for the most part, understand Jewish as on? Well, I don't understand the question, but I guess it refers to this lack of knowledge about Sephardic Jews in the differences and the diversity that you mentioned. For example, Clemmy. I guess that's the question because the question is incomplete here.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So repeat that again.
Yeah, I mean, do you find the Canadian Jews, even though...
If I may.
Sure.
If I may, the question got cut off. What I'm saying, Canadian Jews, even though they might understand or have interacted with Sephardic, when they talk about any topic Jewish, it comes out only the Jews from Europe. There is no balance there. Even holidays. I mean, yes, they know you eat something different for Pesach, but they turn around and ask you, how was your gefilte fish? Did you make a nice gefilte fish? There is a certain process. I would not ask an Indian from India, and I know he is vegetarian, how was his steak happening, or, like that. You really have to process and accept it internally, and that has not happened yet. In my opinion, anyway.
I think that we've had many years since. I can think of many people I know who are quote unquote intermarried between a Sephardi and Ashkenaz. My wife is Ashkenazi, And my wife certainly knows and appreciates everything that we do in our culture and our customs and loves it and cooks the food. And and I can think of many other families now, because don't forget, we've been in Canada now more than 50 years. And it's been a long time since there's been the Sephardi immigration into Canada. So, there's a natural kind of, we meet each other, right? And so I think that enriches the Jewish people. I think it's all a good thing. I think that the more that we can do events like this, the more that we can participate in activities throughout our respective communities, as Sephardi Jews, I think that will help to enrich and to expand awareness of Sephardi customs. And I think that's part of what we do in the Sephardi Association of Ottawa, is to actually it's not just sometimes about preserving our customs, which are absolutely critical, but it's also about making sure that we bring those customs to bring awareness across the whole Jewish community.
I do have more comments. Just a quick comment from Kay Ran. When I met my husband, he was the first Jewish French Arab that I had ever heard of, for example. And then a question for Clemmy: when his family settled in Montreal, was there any interaction with the existing Lebanese diaspora in Quebec, including Lebanese Christians and Muslims? When they first arrived, would they have identified themselves first as Sephardi or Francophone Jews or Lebanese? Two questions. Then one, the first, did you have any interaction with the Lebanese diaspora? And then how you identify yourself, either as Sephardi, Francophone Jews, or Lebanese Jews?
I guess that depends on the context. I would say I'm a Sephardi. I would say growing up in Montreal, I'm a Middle Eastern Jew. I would say, then I would say I'm actually a Jew from Lebanon. There's a number of ways that I would personally define it. Also, at that point in time in 1967, there was Lebanese non-Jewish immigration. Let's be clear. Came in different waves. There was a big wave, maybe 100 years ago, and actually, if you look across Canada, there's Lebanese from way back. But then the next big wave really happened more around the mid 70s, I would say, when the Civil War started. When we first came to Canada, I'm sure Gracie, you felt the same way. We could not find anywhere to go buy pita bread, right? But now, of course, once all the Lebanese came, pita bread has become the most common thing, and Lebanese food has become, the most popular, hip food. Tabbouleh and hummus and all these different things that we all love. It's become a health food now, but at first it was not like that. Actually, I have to say, my parents had a hard time finding the right things that they like to eat at first.
Very hard.
Okay, another question here from Lauren.
Gracie, when I got that, Gracie to jump in on that one. Actually.
Okay, please.
No, it was very hard for us. I remember my mother learned to make pita because she had no choice if she wanted it. But I just wanted to add, before we finish or anything, I don't know, Clemmy, I don't know if you heard about this. Last year, and I'm so glad I did it, I found this group on Facebook of Lebanese Jews.
Yeah, I know.
And we went to Netanya, and they had a party. There were 200 of us, approximately 250 of us.
I think my aunt was there.
Was she? Oh, it was.
I think so.
The best experience, I think, of my life. We had such a great time, and you can't know how happy the Lebanese people lived till you've seen these people see each other again.
Exactly.
They were crying.
Exactly.
Okay, we have some more questions here. One from Lauren Shaps. I'm curious to know how the Sephardi community feels about the push to bring Syrian refugees to Canada today.
Who wants to answer? My mother was asked that question once. And her answer, which was beautiful, she said, as long as they're vetted and checked, the only thing she said was she would tell them was that life was so much better here, but to be, that it was hard, that it was very, very hard coming from Syria, from that kind of a life or climate, to Toronto and experiencing winters and starting over. That she would, that's what she told the reporter. She said that she found it really difficult, and that was the one thing she would tell them.
Was that when she did the National Post one? Is that, yeah. Yeah, I think they were asked that question in the National Post interview.
It was hard. That's what she wanted them to know, that she thought it was great. I mean, obviously you don't want people suffering in Syria. And she thought it was great if they could come, and as long as they were vetted, she said, you know, she wished everybody could help them. Because she didn't have that much help. She had some, but it was hard.
At the end, at least, you know, from my perspective, at the end of the day, you look at, you know, times when many times throughout history that, you know, the Jewish people needed help and the doors were closed to them. And, you know, and you have to, yeah, and you have to remember that. And you got to be, again, of course, you want everybody, I believe everyone should be vetted. But at the end of the day, you just want people to be safe. And if people want to come to Canada and be a Canadian citizen and a part of this country, absolutely.
Okay, just a couple of comments about, for example, someone saying that I wish Jewish school will include history of Sephardic Jews equally in the curriculum. Yeah. And then we have even Arabs, Vicky Hadid is making this comment, even Arabs don't know that they were Jews from the Middle East. And then another question from Jenny, how do you think the experience of Lebanese, Syrian, Sephardi Jews in Canada is different from those in the US or other countries?
I'll take that last one. I think, like I said in my talk, I think, actually no, I didn't say this, I was thinking of talking about this. I think that, I've thought about this often before, because the Lebanese community was so, the Lebanese, not the overall, was so diverse. The Jewish community was actually in Lebanon was very used to living in a diverse environment. And I think that coming to a place like Canada, I think, you know, helped them to adjust a bit more, perhaps. I think maybe it was a little bit of a better adjustment. I'm not too sure what else. I don't know, Gracie, you have any ideas on that one? I think that's, you know, it's hard to say that what kind of the experiences were different. First of all, you have to know that there's a very, very large Lebanese and Syrian community in New York. Most of my family actually is in New York. Some are in Israel. You too?
Mine too.
Yeah. In fact, there's probably 3 or 4 major Lebanese synagogues in Brooklyn. You know, my uncle is very active in one of them. You know, there's a very, you know, one of the things actually is that there's strength in numbers. You know, like in Montreal, there's a Lebanese congregation, the Magen Avraham Synagogue, you know, which took its name from the one Magen Avraham in Lebanon, and maybe there might be somebody here from that synagogue here on this call as well. But living in a place like Ottawa, you know, I think maybe I met one other Lebanese person, so a Jewish person.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge.
Okay, just because we have a few more questions here, someone also raised. For the person who raised his or her hand, I will ask you to write down your question in the chat, please. We have another question from Radamis Zaki. Radamis, telling stories is really great and important, but the question, just it moves here, but the question now is how we can the Jewish heritage in Arab countries, but also in Israel, you know, I don't, well, I'm gonna try to rephrase this. Now, how we can, the Jewish heritage in Arab countries, but also in Israel, I'm not sure there is a museum that preserves the history of Sephardic Jews properly and with dignity. And someone here responded, yes, there is the Babylonian Heritage Museum in Or Yehuda in Israel for Iraqi Jews, for example, but would you like to comment on that?
So let me comment on this. There are many museums. There's the Egyptian Museum in Tel Aviv. There's the Libyan Museum. They're now doing a Sephardi museum, which used to be at the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem. There's the Babylonian Museum in Or Yehuda. But the real issue is, how do we communicate the story of Sephardi Jewish civilization? And one of the ways I think Israel has come to terms with this is I don't know how many people know this, but there was legislation passed in the Knesset in 2014, and beginning November 30th, 2015, they have enacted a Memorial Day called Yom Plitim, Refugee Day. But it's really not just about the refugee experience. It's really a celebration of Sephardic life. And every November 30th, around the Jewish world, this is now celebrated. There will be an event at the consulate in Toronto, which will be Zoomed everywhere. There's ones going on all over the world. Israel celebrates it. And the goal in the end is, how do we change curriculum so one just doesn't learn about European Jewry, one also learns about Sephardi Jewry. And for that to happen, our Jewish schools have to integrate the stories in the curriculum of the Jewish experience. And so here is one suggestion that we can do. Today, there are many people who are on this Zoom. We've had panelists who can speak about Syria and Lebanon. Well, when you have Holocaust Day, for example, Yom HaShoah, then you bring in the witnesses who are Holocaust survivors. Why can't we on Yom Plitim? Why can't we have events where we bring the Sephardi, the parents, the grandparents to the classroom, so they take pride, so they hear the stories? It isn't just museums. We have to bring it into the schools and the classrooms so the generations learn that it's not just the past, it's also the present. It's not just cuisine, it's also minhag and customs. It's also a flavor of life in which Jewish civilization has thrived for centuries with Sephardi life.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dr. Green. Any other comment or would you like to add something, the panelists?
I think I want to add something. I think one of your questions was about Isaac, was about raising awareness in the non-Jewish Arab world, if I'm not mistaken. And and I think I completely agree with that. And this is particularly the case with younger people from the Arab world who just would not be aware of the Jewish presence in their countries just because they're not there. Jews are not there anymore. There are some Jewish institutions still present, and they might see them and wonder what that's about. But I think it is really important that that awareness, even especially in the Arab world, is brought to light. I can say personally, from a personal experience, when I meet other Lebanese, especially, who realize that I am also Lebanese like them, but I am Jewish, I have gotten extremely positive responses. They're so excited. I even once met a guy whose last name was Sroor, because Sroor, actually, I got to say, is actually not purely a Jewish name. His last name, he came to pick me up. I was in a taxi. And he saw me, and he saw my kippah on my head, and he stopped himself. He said, "Oh, I thought you were Lebanese like me." I said to him, "Yeah, I am Lebanese like you." But then I explained to him the whole thing, and he was so excited because his wife has the same last name. He wanted to take a picture with me, and I think there's a positive thing to that. I think if we can educate, and raise awareness in the Arab world, about the Jewish history in those countries, I think that would really go a long way.
I've gotten some fan mail from Syria.
Yeah, I've had that too.
I have. I've gotten stuff from like Italy and England was the most recent one. But sometimes, like if I go into my other inbox on Facebook, I'll see all these messages, and some of them, one of them, because I looked on the profile, because it was written, the name of the person was written in Arabic. It was a nice message, and I looked, and he was in Damascus. And I mean, it's cool when your movie makes it all the way over there. But he said that he had no idea that, he wrote me, he's just like, I didn't know that Jews were here.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, exactly.
Okay. We have someone who raised his or her hand, Bijan Rafi. I don't want to, give the impression that we don't want to let you to ask your question. Just, I would like to be sure that you want to ask your question, Bijan, if you're still there. Okay. Well, Dr. Green, please go ahead for the closing words.
So I first want to thank Isabelle and the Sephardi Association of Ottawa, for Isaac for putting this together, for our panelists, Clemmy, Gracie, and Michelle. And there are two things that come out of this, I think. The first and the most important is that we need to get together more to share the stories, because this nourishes us. It gives us energy. And what we find is friends, and it's important to connect with those friends. And the second thing is that there is not just one story. We have many, many stories. The story in Morocco is different than the story of Egypt, which is different than the story of Syria and Lebanon. And we have to appreciate that there's a texture, and we can learn lessons from everyone. And the more we learn those lessons, the more we can share with our Ashkenazi family, and the more we can share with the Arab world, because our story is a universal story. And the more that we can have experiences like this, the more that people like Michelle can make movies about their grandparents, the more we can collect the stories, the better we are able to be strengthened as Kalal Yisrael. And that is the most important, that we're strong in terms of our Jewish peoplehood, we're strong in terms of our Jewish identity, and we're strong in terms of our Sephardi identity. So thank you, everyone, for participating.
All right, thank you very much to all the panelists, to Dr. Green, to Isabelle, and all the audience for being here with us this evening and sharing your comments and questions.
Thank
Shalom,
you very much.
everyone.
Shalom, Shavuot Tov, everyone.
Shavuot Tov. And
Shavuot Tov.
Shavuot Tov. Thank you. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, merci.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.